A lie can go around the world before the truth can wake up and put its pants on. No baseball legend proves that old saying more than Ty Cobb. For generations, Cobb's name has carried two images: the numbers that seem untouchable, .366, lifetime batting average, 4,189 hits, 54 steals of home, and the myth of a monster. A dirty player who sharpened his spikes, a violent racist who attacked black men on the street, even a murderer who left bodies in his wake. Ask most fans, and they'll tell you Cobb wasn't just a great player, he was the game's villain, the meanest man to ever pick up a bat. Movies, documentaries, and endless retellings have made that story feel like fact. But what if everything you think you know about Ty Cobb is wrong? When Charles Leerhsen began digging into Cobb's story, he found three very different camps of opinion. The first group barely knew who Cobb was. Some thought he was a long-forgotten politician, others joked he invented the Cobb salad. To them, Ty Cobb was just a name from the distant past, irrelevant, dusty, not worth remembering. The second group was far larger and far louder. These were the fans who did know Cobb, and they despised him. To them, he was the cruelest man baseball had ever seen. A racist thug, a spike-sharpening menace, the kind of player who would rather maim you than beat you. Many believed wild tales that he had murdered men in bar fights or pistol-whipped black strangers just for walking down the street. The repetition of these stories, passed down by fathers, echoed in books, splashed across documentaries and movies, gave the myths the weight of truth. And then there was the third group, much smaller and more cautious. These were the skeptics. They weren't convinced Cobb was an angel, but they wondered, could any man truly be so one-dimensional, so relentlessly evil? For 70 years, they sensed that the evil Cobb story was too convenient, too exaggerated. But without a different narrative to point to, they stayed quiet. Most of the world accepted the second view, that Ty Cobb was baseball's monster, and for decades, that story went unchallenged. So how did Ty Cobb go from being baseball's first superstar to one of its most hated figures? The answer begins after his death in 1961. Enter Al Stump, a hack writer hired to ghostwrite Cobb's autobiography. When Cobb died, Stump saw an opportunity and took it. He sold a sensational article to True magazine, painting Cobb as a drunken, gun-waving lunatic who terrorized bartenders, doctors, even his own family. He hinted at murders that were never investigated, spun scenes that read more like a B-movie script than a biography. And it sold. Hollywood soon joined in. Field of Dreams gave us the famous laugh line, "Nobody liked that son of a B." In 1995, Tommy Lee Jones played Cobb as an unhinged villain in the film Cobb, a movie based on Stump's distorted writing. Ken Burns' acclaimed documentary Baseball sealed the image, portraying Cobb as the dark opposite of Jackie Robinson, a Southern racist, an embarrassment to the game. And because the myth was so entertaining, people kept repeating it. Writers exaggerated it, fans quoted it, teachers passed it down as fact. Repetition turned rumor into history. The story of the monster Cobb became one of baseball's most beloved myths because it gave fans an easy villain to hate. But when Leerhsen went back to the original sources, letters, newspapers, census records, he found something shocking. The truth didn't match the myth. In fact, it often contradicted it. When Charles Leerhsen sifted through the evidence, the legend of the evil Cobb started to crumble almost instantly. Take the claim that Cobb ignored children who wrote to him, even stealing the stamps off their envelopes. In reality, the archives are full of his replies, handwritten letters, sometimes 5 pages long. He often apologized for sending too many autographed photos, not too few. To those kids, Cobb wasn't a monster. He was a hero who took the time to answer. or the stories about Cobb's supposed racism. Writers claimed he beat black men in the streets of Detroit and Georgia. But when Leerhsen checked census records and newspapers, the men in those infamous fights turned out to be white. Yes, Cobb brawled. He had a quick temper, but he fought with white men just as often, and usually over insults, not race. Cobb's own ancestry tells a different story. His great-grandfather was run out of town for preaching against slavery. His father broke up a lynch mob as a young politician. And when asked about integration in 1952, Cobb's words were unambiguous. The Negro should be accepted wholeheartedly, and not grudgingly. He admired Willie Mays, called Roy Campanella the player who most reminded him of himself, and even threw out first pitches at Negro League games. Even the infamous Spikes myth doesn't hold up. Writers love to say Cobb sat in the dugout, filing his cleats into weapons. But his teammates and rivals remembered something different. They said Cobb was the smoothest slider they'd ever seen. He had 9 different sliding techniques, all designed to avoid tags, not to cause injury. Yes, it was intimidating to see him coming. But opponents admitted, he didn't cut men up on purpose. And beyond the field, Cobb's life showed another side. He funded a hospital in Georgia, donated to schools, and left much of his fortune to charity. Those deeds were buried under decades of scandalous headlines that sold more papers than the truth ever could. The evidence was clear. Ty Cobb wasn't a saint, but he wasn't the monster people love to imagine either. He was complicated, contradictory, just like the rest of us. If the evidence shows a more complex, even generous Cobb, why does the villain story still dominate? The answer is simple. It was just too good to let go. People love a monster. A clean-cut villain makes a better story than a complicated man with flaws and virtues. Saying Ty Cobb was a racist brute lets fans feel morally superior. I'd never act like that. I'm better than him. It's a story that flatters the audience, even as it entertains them. Repetition gave it power. Once Al Stump's tall tales hit the newsstands, they were picked up, reprinted, and exaggerated. Hollywood amplified it. Documentaries recycled it. Teachers and fathers passed it down as baseball gospel, and the more it was repeated, the more truthy it sounded. Leerhsen compared it to the myth that hair and fingernails keep growing after death. Not true, but we've heard it so often, we believe it anyway. And there was no Ty Cobb alive to defend himself. After 1961, the monster story spread unchecked. In the end, it wasn't statistics or eyewitness accounts that shaped Cobb's legacy, it was the irresistible appeal of a myth that entertained people far more than the messy, inconvenient truth. So who was Ty Cobb, really? He was not the cartoon villain of Stump's imagination. He wasn't the crazed racist waving pistols in the night, but neither was he a saint. Cobb was quick-tempered, proud, and often difficult. He brawled too often, spoke his mind too harshly, and carried the scars of a complicated family life, including the trauma of losing his father to a shooting at the hands of his own mother just weeks before his big league debut. But Cobb was also intelligent, ambitious, and deeply human. He wrote back to children, helped fund hospitals and schools in Georgia, and left a fortune behind for medical care. He respected great black players, supported integration before many others did, and never fit the easy caricature of baseball's racist monster. On the field, he was dazzling, a genius of psychological baseball. Stealing home a record 54 times, inventing 9 different slides, and playing the game with an intensity that still feels modern a century later. Charles Leerhsen put it best. The greatness of Ty Cobb had to be seen, and to see him was to remember him forever. His real story is not one of pure evil or pure goodness, but of a man flawed, brilliant, misunderstood. And maybe that's the lesson. Baseball history is filled with myths and legends, but the truth is always more complicated and far more interesting. Ty Cobb's reputation may never fully escape the lies, but for those willing to look closer, the real Cobb is worth knowing. Ty Cobb's story reminds us of something bigger than baseball. We love simple tales, heroes we can worship, villains we can despise. They're easy to repeat, easy to believe. But real people are never that simple. Cobb was brilliant and brutal, caring and cruel, generous and selfish all at once. For decades, a lie defined him. And maybe that says more about us than it does about him. We chose the entertaining story, not the true one. So here's the question. If even the greatest hitter in baseball history can be misunderstood for more than half a century, how many other truths we accept without question might be wrong? What do you think was Ty Cobb baseball's villain, or one of its most misunderstood legends?